Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we get back into everyone's favorite Cyberforce spinoff with Codename Styke Force number 3. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in April of 1994, we see here the cover that was previewed in issue number 2. Of course, this, as I stated before, is an homage to the Stanley Kubrick film Dr. Strangelove. And if you've never seen that film, I recommend you give it a watch. It's definitely dated and the pacing is weird at certain times in the movie, but overall, I believe that the themes of the movie are still rather poignant to this day, and it's worth at least one watch if you ever have the opportunity. The one thing I find strange about this cover is how it says in this issue, and then lists all 5 of the main characters of the Styke Force team. Why wouldn't they be in this issue? They've been in the previous 2. We saw them get captured at the end of issue number 2. So it seems likely we're going to be finding out what happens to all of them in this one. I don't understand the logic behind this part. Art, Brandon Peterson. Pages 12 through 18, inked by Troy Hubbs. Co-plot, script, Mark Silvestri. Letters, Chris Eliopoulos. Colors, Joe Chiodo. Co-plot, editor, David Wohl. Computer colors and a bit of coloring, Brian Haberlin, Tyson Wengler-Drew. Film output, Clydeen Nee and in color. Color assist, Monica Benet. Production, Dennis Heisler. Assistant editor, Annie DeSantis. The story begins with a very well-drawn and colored full-page splash of a battleship being destroyed by a barrage of torpedoes coming from the submarine that was stolen by Death's Angel in the first issue, as he uses said submarine to terrorize the globe. Everyone aboard this ship was killed, obviously. However, I do want to point out this is not the ship that Captain Rourke, who we saw in issue number 1, is captaining. That is an aircraft carrier by the name of the USS Furious. This ship is completely unnamed, and I guess for good reason, seeing as how this is the only time we see it, and it's being destroyed in this one instance. We are then teleported to said submarine, where Death's Angel gloats about how he is unstoppable and can strike anywhere on the globe with the submarine's nuclear capabilities. He then tells the Styke Force team that while they were unconscious, all of their abilities were analyzed and that their bindings were designed specifically to neutralize any abilities and capabilities that they may have, and that struggling to try and free themselves will be entirely futile. We even see that they basically built a sarcophagus for Killraiser to neutralize his ability to pop blades out of basically anywhere on his body. However, this confuses Stryker to some extent, as he tells Death's Angel that they're a mercenary team and no one is going to try and bargain or pay for their release. However, Death's Angel tells Stryker that he never intended on trying to bargain for their release. He intends on making them mindless soldiers in his army, as he's procured brain boxes from Cyberdata and wants to put them into good use. Now, I should remind everyone who's watching this, the brain boxes, if you don't know, are what Cyberdata was using to control the entire Cyberforce team and make them operate against their will. Death's Angel then activates the force field on the front of the team's holding cell and begins to mock them, telling Stryker that his band of Rent-A-Heroes will make a nice addition to his force. As Death's Angel rounds the corner, Stryker tells the team that it's go time, as we see one of his arms split in half to reveal a plasma torch, which immediately begins to cut away his bindings. Now, it does seem as though perhaps the analysis and scanning that Death's Angel talked about that he performed on the team to figure out what their abilities were may have picked this up. However, it seems also likely that this was well hidden enough within the advanced cybernetics of Stryker's arm that it wouldn't necessarily have been picked up. After Stryker frees the team, he actually unveils a brand new ability that I think is kind of cool, honestly, in the fact that he can sacrifice one of his arms to then use the parts from said arm to create new weapons and ammo. He makes a new bow for Blood Bow and 2 pistols for himself, including the rounds that the pistols fire. He then uses one of the said pistols to blast the control unit on the door, which disables the force field, allowing the team to escape their cell. Also, this seems a little bit weird, I know. Like, the idea he can sacrifice his arm for parts does make sense, but then you have to question, how is he able to use these parts to make, pistols and, firing guns, the ammunition that the guns fire, the bow that he needs to make for Bloodbow to use. The bow seemingly being the most, easy of these items to make, but fully functional firearms, that's a little bit more involved. My guess, and I don't know this for sure, so take it with a grain of salt, is that perhaps Cyberdata used a more rudimentary form of the nanotech that we see in Super Patriot's limbs to make Stryker's limbs, meaning Stryker can't just transform them at will with thought, but he can then reshape them into functional weapons. Again, this is simply a theory I have, but I believe it makes the most sense when you think about the context of what Cyberdata would later do with Super Patriot's limbs. Upon freeing the team, Stryker instructs Bloodbow and Killraiser to make their way to the command room and take over the sub, while he instructs Black Anvil and Tempest to find the missile command center and disable the sub's ability to fire any of its nuclear payload. As the duo makes their way through the sub, they encounter a 2-guard unit, which they easily overpower, as Tempest uses her wind abilities to create a distraction, which allows Anvil to sneak up behind the two men and knock them out in one shot. As they make their way to the missile command center, they encounter a problem. Tempest, who is a very skilled hacker, is usually not too intimidated by what she finds. However, the computers aboard this submarine are years advanced past anything she's ever encountered in the past, meaning that she's not going to be able to disable these as quickly as she once thought. As Anvil asks, "Hey, you got this, Ace?" And she responds by stating, "Oh yeah, I got this," and then thinks to herself, "Not," which of course would have been a rather poignant type of slang to use during the mid-90s. As the precious minutes tick by, Tempest is finally able to break into the system and begin the missile shutdown sequence. Unfortunately, this has taken longer than expected and has given the enemy enough time to mobilize reinforcements who are now here to take back the command center. Tempest tells Anvil that she needs time, that the sequence must be completed in order and there are still 5 missiles left to disable. At this point, Anvil jumps in front of her and uses his body, which is nigh impervious, to prevent all of the hailstorm of bullets from hitting her in an attempt to give her time to finish the sequence. As they get to the final missile, one of the bullets happens to make its way past Anvil and destroys the computer terminal that Tempest is working at. This means that she cannot disable the final missile from inside of the ship, and this puts them in a pretty precarious predicament as there is still one active nuclear missile which can be fired at will, prompting Black Anvil to even turn to her and say, "This is a problem, isn't it?" Meanwhile, in another part of the ship, we once again rejoin Stryker, who is trying to make his way to the control room which the submarine is operated by. As he does so, he starts to contemplate what exactly the plan that Death's Angel has really is. He's never made his demands known to anyone, and for months he's just been sailing this sub around the oceans, terrorizing the world. And Stryker even starts to think about how none of this really makes a whole lot of sense, thinking to himself that Death's Angel is very well organized in his capabilities, as he should have never been able to get his hands on this sub in the first place, and that he has tons of men under his command, which gives him the makings of a world-class villain, especially given the firepower and capabilities of the submarine. As he approaches one door in particular, he notices that it has some sort of shielding, which prevents the infrared in his cybernetic eye from penetrating. He then opens the door to find what's inside and is greeted by none other than Death's Angel himself, who seemingly was well aware of what Stryker had up his sleeve and has prepared for it, as he also has a large contingency of soldiers on the bridge, along with the dignitaries that he took hostage when he stole the submarine back in issue number 1. Back in the missile command room, we see Tempest leaving, as she and Anvil were easily able to defeat the security detail sent to stop them, but unfortunately, the control panel needed to disable the missiles has been rendered completely inoperable. At this point, she knows that they only have one hope left, and that hope, apparently, is to send Black Anvil out into the open ocean to open up the hatch from outside of the sub, get inside, and disable the missile from the exterior of the submarine. There's only a few problems with this. Number one, they're 800 meters down. Now, this is okay because Anvil's super powerful body is able to withstand the crushing pressures of the deep. But it does not account for the fact that he has no way to breathe and is assumingly just holding his breath this entire time, as we see air bubbles escaping from his mouth, so I guess that's what we're supposed to believe. There's also a few other problems. Number one, it should not be this bright at all. At that depth, there should be basically no sunlight, meaning that Anvil would be operating in total darkness. And the final problem, and this is one that he and Tempest could have dealt with earlier had they thought about it, he has no idea which one of these hatches is the one he's supposed to get into to disable the missile. All of these hatches but one have been disabled already, and if he picks the wrong one, he's just wasting time, and that missile would remain operative. Back on the sub's command center, faced with overwhelming odds, Stryker drops his pistol and surrenders to Death's Angel. Death's Angel makes the comment that Stryker seems rather accustomed to being captured, and that's something he'll need to program out of him once he installs the brain box in Stryker's feeble mind. However, this was just a ploy to get Death's Angel to lower his guard, as we see Stryker immediately charge forward and land a huge punch on Death Angel's chin. Death Angel is knocked to the ground and is bleeding from the mouth, as his men state, "He hit the boss, we need to get him." Stryker then says, "What, are you afraid to take me on yourself, Mr. Angel?" However, Death's Angel commands all of his men to stay back, that Stryker is his. He then gets to his feet and unleashes an electrical energy attack, which immediately immobilizes Stryker, knocking him to the ground. He then tells Stryker that while his abilities may be enough to deal with street-level thugs, it's nowhere close to what he's going to need to take on a superpowered being such as himself. Stryker then states, "I knew you'd never fight me fair." Now, I do find it odd that Stryker led with a punch with his organic hand versus one of his cybernetic hands, as it seems to me that he probably would have been able to hit harder with one of those arms, and this may have actually knocked Death's Angel unconscious. Perhaps. We don't know exactly how strong he is, but given that one punch with a normal human arm was enough to knock him off of his feet and cause him to bleed from the mouth, it seems likely that maybe one of these cyber arms could have dealt a knockout punch. We then get an advertisement for New Men number 2, featuring the brand new supervillain known as Girth. I don't know anything about Girth, and honestly, I really don't know anything about New Men either. I've only recently started trying to hunt down issues of New Men so that I could make videos about them for the channel, and as I'm recording this, I only have a handful. However, as I get more, I will eventually start making videos, so if you're interested in that, stay tuned because it will happen eventually. Back outside of the sub, as Black Anvil desperately tries to figure out what his next move should be, he does remember that Tempest told him it was the first hatch. Unfortunately, she didn't clarify whether this was the first hatch on the port or the starboard side. But then Black Anvil remembers that he doesn't know which side is port or starboard to begin with, so he just takes his chances and rips one of the hatches open. He then dives down into the missile tube and begins to go to work on the missile, trying to disable it from what little he knows about disabling nuclear missiles. We then reach my absolute favorite, a 2-page vertical splash centerfold. Hooray, I love it, it's great. Meanwhile, back in the control room, Death's Angel continues to use his blast of death, as he calls it, to inflict major damage and pain on Stryker. Stryker, however, remains defiant in the face of certain doom as he tells Death's Angel that it feels like more of a blast of annoyance. Real witty comeback there, buddy. Death's Angel says what's really going to be annoying is when I execute my master plan. At this point, however, Stryker decides to go for broke and call out Death's Angel, stating, I don't think you actually even have a plan. I think you're just a two-bit villain with too much time on his hands. And then states, I don't really think you're that sinister, mister. Clever. We see what you did there, Mark. That was good. Death's Angel states, of course I have a plan. Shut up. Then Stryker decides to call his bluff as he looks over at Angel's men and states, really? Have you guys heard about what this plan is? Do any of you know what he's talking about? As one of them begins to answer, Death's Angel tells them all to be silent and then tells Stryker, of course I have a plan. I'm going to sink more ships and then I'm going to level some cities. And then Stryker interrupts, stating, see, that's it. That's all you've got going for you. You have no forethought beyond that. You've been terrorizing the world for months, and that's the best you've come up with. At this point, all of Angel's men start to realize that none of them knew what the plan was, and they were all just kind of making their own assumptions. One thought that they were going to try and make the world a better place for all mankind. Another thought that they were going to just rule the world with an iron fist. One thought they were going to rob Fort Knox, and one thought they were going to take over the Baxter Building. Again, Mark, we see what you did there. That was clever. 2 Marvel references on 1 page. Good job, buddy. Having heard enough, Death's Angel's fury finally boils over as he screams for everyone to be silent. He then tells Stryker, let's see how my blast of annoyance, as you call it, affects the dignitaries that I've taken hostage, as he takes aim about to finally end the lives of the hostages he's been holding for months. However, before this can be done, the party is interrupted when none other than Killraiser and Bloodbow enter the room through a hole that Killraiser cuts through one of the nearby walls. Bloodbow wastes no time in taking aim at Death's Angel as he looses 2 arrows into Death Angel's wings, pinning him to the wall behind him. He then jokingly tells Stryker that he thinks he deserves a bonus. However, before things can get worse for Death's Angel, he reaches back and touches the wall behind him, bringing up a force field to protect himself. We then see Killraiser and Stryker desperately trying to break through the force field. However, they don't possess enough firepower or cutting ability to do so. Death's Angel then laughs, believing that he has finally succeeded as he once again taps a button on the wall, stating that he's just unleashed all of the missiles from the submarine, which are targeting all of the world's largest cities. As he then begins to use a hidden elevator to escape the room that they're in, he tells Stryker that he hopes he can find solace in the fact that he's responsible for the deaths of so many millions. Back outside of the sub, Anvil is rather distraught when he hears a large clunk and realizes that it is not a good sound. He holds on for dear life as the missile that he was trying to disarm is suddenly launched and breaks the surface of the ocean. Realizing that he's running out of time, Anvil decides that he has to go for broke, so he rips a hole through the side of the missile's warhead to expose a yellow and green wire. He then curses the rocket scientists who built this missile, stating, "What is it with you guys? You watch too many movies. A red and green wire? Why is it always this difficult?" He then realizes that when in doubt, just smash, so he decides to start punching the missile's warhead with both of his fists. This, however, seems to work as the missile starts to go off course and descend back into the ocean. However, the joy that Anvil immediately has is short-lived when he realizes this means that the missile is going to impact the ocean and explode, which is really going to hurt. We then see the missile do just that, and Anvil responds by just stating, "Ow." As his plan completely unravels, Death's Angel makes his way towards a nearby escape pod. As he enters the pod, he states that while Stryker has seemingly been able to outwit him at every turn, he will one day have his revenge and make Stryker pay, so vows Death's Angel as he launches the pod out into the open ocean. Unfortunately for Death's Angel, he then immediately realizes that the controls for this escape pod have been disabled. This is a problem as the pod spirals out of control and begins to dive towards the ocean floor, and Death's Angel then panics as he realizes that he will soon be crushed to death by the depths of the ocean pressures. Meanwhile, back on the main sub, we see Tempest, depicted holding a large pipe wrench, who has seemingly disabled and sabotaged the escape pod to cause this to happen, with the aid of the women she freed who were being held captive by Death's Angel, who was using them for his own carnal pleasures, let's call it. They were more than happy to help her out in this venture, and it seems as though the day has been saved. Later on, we see a news broadcast by the not Connie Chung, as we'll call her, who is working for CNN, though shout out to Brandon Peterson, who was smart enough to obscure the trademarked CNN logo in this image, unlike Todd McFarlane, who was just drawing it front and center with the expectation that at no point it would cause any legal troubles for him. Connie goes on to state that the world has been saved and that the threat of this nuclear bombardment has been ended by the professional bodyguards known as Styke Force. I find it odd that she phrases it that way, but maybe the idea is she didn't want to tell the world that they were just saved by mercenaries. We then find out that this broadcast is being watched by none other than Weatherman on the Skywatch space station, as he states that he believes that this peace will be short-lived unless they're able to deal with the imminent threat that is endangering the existence of Stormwatch and perhaps the entire world as this part of the story comes to an end. Now, I do find it interesting that Stormwatch is just now being talked about in this story, as it seems as though the UN's private superhero peacekeeping force might have been involved when the entire world was under a nuclear terrorist threat. It just seems odd that Styke Force were the ones told to go take care of this and not the UN's actual peacekeeping superhero team. We then get an advertisement for the guest appearance that will involve Stormwatch in issues 4, 5, and 6 of Codename Styke Force, though I find it odd that what I can only assume is the cover for issue number 4 only depicts a single Stormwatch character, that character being Battalion. Now, Battalion is the leader of Stormwatch 1, so this makes sense, but I do find it odd that no one else from Stormwatch gets depicted on the front cover, not a single one. That just seems a little weird to me. We then reach what is at this point still the unnamed letter column, where readers could have their letters potentially printed and responded to within the pages of Codename Styke Force. Most of these are pretty bog standard, but I did find a couple of them interesting. One reader wrote in about how he really liked the banter that the Styke Force team have with one another, and I hadn't thought about it before I read his letter, but he is right that the Styke Force team seems to be a lot more like happy-go-lucky, taking jabs at each other than we see in other Image superhero teams, which does give them more of a ragtag mercenary group feel than you would get with state-sponsored teams like Stormwatch or Youngblood. And speaking of state-sponsored teams, that brings up the other letter I found really interesting. One reader apparently had a real problem with the fact that the Styke Force team are mercenaries and that they're basically just doing jobs for pay with no real moral skin in the game. However, I find that to be an odd take, given the fact that Youngblood and Stormwatch are both state-sponsored in the sense that Youngblood is answering directly to the United States government and is on a taxpayer-funded payroll, and that the Stormwatch teams are under the direct supervision of the United Nations and are receiving their paychecks from seemingly all over the planet. And even if you want to get more localized than that, Savage Dragon is a state worker himself. He is an actual police officer working for the Chicago PD, meaning that he is 100% getting paid to fight crime. And in fact, Savage Dragon is kind of even a better example of how he was not going to fight crime whatsoever on his own. He did everything in his power to avoid fighting the Vicious Circle until he finally felt like he had no other choice but to join up with the police department and start fighting the Vicious Circle head on. He didn't need to join the police department to do that. He could have just done it on his own, but he wanted to make sure he was getting a paycheck for the privilege of him going out and fighting crime like that. So, it's not as if there aren't other characters who are out there doing this for money and not for altruism, the way that we see characters like Superman do it. Superman gains nothing of monetary value from going out and saving the world. He's doing that because it's something he genuinely believes he is called upon to do. You know, it's really, I feel like, an odd criticism that you would expect all superheroes to be working out of complete altruism with no expectation of any other type of gain for their troubles, especially when they're almost always risking their lives to do so. We then get an advertisement for another bitchin' issue of Savage Dragon, as this ad puts it, Savage Dragon number 11. Now, as I'm recording this, I have not reached issue number 11 of Savage Dragon, but I will eventually, so stay tuned for that in the future. We then reach Image Info, which of course was information about upcoming Image comics of that time, so I'm not going to get into it, and an advertisement for Spawn. If you'd like to know more about Spawn, feel free to check out my Spawn playlist, and stay tuned because we're about to hit my episode on issue number 50. On the final page of the issue, we get an advertisement for Images of Tomorrow, and this was a really unique idea where Stormwatch 25 would come out 15 months early. The idea being that you were seeing the potential future that could happen where the world was in peril and the Stormwatch team had been completely upended and certain characters were dead and characters from other books were involved. This was a real big chance that Jim Lee and the crew over at Homage Studios were taking, and I kind of applaud them for it. Now, I want to make perfectly clear, at the point I'm recording this video, I haven't yet made it to this part of the Stormwatch story, but if you want to catch up on everything that happens prior to this, you can check out my Stormwatch playlist at any point, and stay tuned because I will very soon, well, I say very soon, in maybe not too distant of a future, I will get to this issue and we'll be making an episode directly about it. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Bow and Board. This one specifically is advertising the sale of ash cans of Cyberforce and signed ash cans of Cyberforce number 0. For anyone who doesn't know, Bow and Board was a mail-away service that you could use to get things like ash cans or signed comics or potentially difficult to find issues that you were looking for. I don't know if it still exists today. I should look that up at some point. But if it does and you happen to know about it, let me know in the comments below because I would like to know as well. And that was Codename Styke Force number 3. And I have a few problems with this issue. And not just this issue, but really the 3-issue story arc that this issue completes. Right at the beginning, Death's Angel was portrayed as a really top-level supervillain who was posing a global threat. And we are now in this issue being asked to accept the idea that this man who was able to put together a crack team of, hired guns, arm them, crash the christening of the world's most advanced nuclear submarine, kidnap high-level dignitaries, steal the submarine, then use the submarine for months to terrorize the globe with the threat of nuclear bombardment, had no plan past any of that whatsoever. Like, he had no idea what he was going to do past where he was. That doesn't make any sense at all. Why would anyone go to the trouble and the expense and the effort of doing everything that he had done up until this point to have no goal past this point going forward? It's ridiculous. And it really just feels like they either wrote themselves into a corner or had to progress the story faster than they thought they were going to, and just kind of threw this out there as a way to wrap things up as quickly as they could to get themselves into issue number 4 with the Stormwatch team up that was going to be happening in issue number 4 through 6. I don't know. I could be wrong, but it just, something feels off about the whole thing, which really is unfortunate because the presentation of this book is good. Mark Silvestri's coloring team at this point in Image's history was second to none. They were so good. I mean, I'm talking like, I feel like you can put them up against anyone who was coloring for DC or Marvel at this time, and this team either holds their own with those teams or is besting them. They are really just knocking out of the park on the colors and the way that they're doing the shading and the lighting effects. It's brilliant. And for that to all be kind of like lost on the idea that this story arc just ends with such a whimper is really unfortunate. But then again, these are just my opinions. You may feel that the story ended just fine and you thought it was kind of a comedic way of ending this very serious threat to world peace, and that there was really nothing that needed to be changed. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.